So with me today, I've got Andy Hoare from South Staffordshire Council and Colin Jupe from our partners at Assurity Systems. What we want to do is just to walk through from global to local some of the issues around the world that we live in terms of the risks and responses to cyber attacks. It's something that's a work in progress for all of us. I know it's a constant challenge to keep up and keep ahead, but hopefully we will be able to shed some light on some of the background to what's happening, and therefore what we need to be doing next to stay ahead of the game. At the moment, for iESE, we are in the middle of building, with the support of a number of people from across the sector, from NCSC and elsewhere, a cyber centre of excellence for local public services. So everything from education and training through to defence and response when something happens, in order that we as a sector can collectively respond as effectively as possible, but also as cost effectively as possible. So that's a work in progress, and I'll say something a little bit more about that as we go. And today is a chance to us also to touch base with you and get your concerns and issues and build them into that discussion as we go forward. So to start with, just want to set the scene at that global level, because the world that we occupy in terms of cyber security is very unusual, in the sense that we're not just dealing with issues of concern with respect to small private actors. It actually goes beyond that. So perhaps I can start with you, Colin, if you might just start in terms of setting the scene in terms of what does the national and global picture look like in terms of those things that we're currently facing, and who's behind them and why.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. Yes, as you say, it's no longer a young person in a hoodie in their bedroom attacking us. State-sponsored attacks are big business, to the point where most of our enemies, for want of a better word, are recruiting and training en masse. They even offer free education for these skills. In some cases, it's compulsory education for these skills. And I'll just pull a few of the states that are the largest and provide the biggest threat to us in a second. Yeah, we see daily headlines, don't we, all of us, about the devastating effects and the successes that these attackers are having. And just by way of setting a scene for the UK, councils alone have had over 2 million attacks in 2022, to the point where the NCSC has been forced to intervene in 18 of those successful attacks on local government. And obviously 18 is just the tip of the iceberg, but what it's telling us is that the malware that the attackers are using is regularly going unnoticed by our current systems. In terms of scale of state-nation attack, GCHQ's got about 5,000 to 6,000 employees, something of that nature. And I guess I don't know what the number of people defending our country is, but let's say it's I don't know, a multiple of 2, maybe 3 times that. If you contrast that with China, and a third of all malware attacks emanate from China, they're reputed to have more than 100,000 state-sponsored attackers. Many of those are in Wuhan, an area that became newsworthy a year or so ago. And they've got a massive cybersecurity centre there, something like 15 square miles big. Their motives, you mentioned motives earlier, Andrew, and their motives are thought to be about theft of IP to meet their economic growth targets. China tends to have very long-term views on economic growth, and by long-term, tens of years often, where in the West, particularly in the UK and the US, we tend to have much shorter periods of thinking because of the political situations we have. And it isn't that they don't have the necessary skills necessarily to develop IP. It's that they don't have the time to develop it in order to meet their growth targets. So that's their key motivation. By far the largest, though, of all attackers is Russia. And it's estimated they've got up to 250,000 personnel that are actively sponsored by the state to try to get within their enemies' systems. By way of example, they've got about half the population of the USA, yet they've got 6 times the number of engineering graduates, many of whom are encouraged, in inverted commas, to become attackers. Their main motivation tends not to be IP or money. It's much more about disruption. And we've seen, haven't we, about what they've done with the destabilization of their enemy states with critical national infrastructure attacks in Ukraine and other parts in the West. And of course, the disruption they are reputed to have put to elections. There are 2 other big state nations that tend to feature highly in the list of where attacks come from. The next one would be North Korea, and their motivation is slightly different to the others. Their motivation would tend to be money, which is why they're a hotbed for ransomware. And they famously, organizations within North Korea are Lazarus and the APT38 group. Again, reports are that they start to train some of their hackers from the age of 11. So this isn't something that people just choose to go into. This is something which is organized by state. And the one other country I wanted to mention was Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard is a sort of quasi-governmental organization, and they claim to be the 4th largest cyber army in the world. And their motivation tends to be political, particularly in the Middle East. But there are concerns also that group may act against its own government. So not a stable organization at all. And so their motivations may well change, and that may well affect their tactics. So with all of that, all these huge hundreds of thousands of people attacking us, the life of a cybersecurity professional in the UK is a rather difficult one, to say the least. And the old adage applies. They only have to break into our systems once, and we have to defend them all the time. And with all those huge resources, that isn't easy.
Thank you. So essentially, we've got a range of organisations that effectively are spending what must be billions of dollars just on cyber, compared to our budgets, which were somewhat lighter than that. And they've got a range of motivations, and hopefully, I guess those range of motivations help us to understand perhaps what we also need to do about that in terms of our response, as it were. But nevertheless, we are. It's asymmetric, the relationship. They've got a massive budget and massive resources, and we haven't. And I guess coming back to your point about the large number of attacks, I mean, I guess it's not the number of attacks, it's the sophistication of attacks that's gone up. It's it's not
absolutely, yeah. And we've seen a huge rise in targeted attacks, in zero-day polymorphic attacks, in fileless attacks. All the things that are difficult to spot, difficult to detect. Polymorphic attacks, for example, because of their nature, they change regularly, which means that detection-based systems can be less, potentially not effective at all in detecting them and therefore doing something with them. And even with the advent of AI, artificial intelligence, and ML, machine learning, that many of the EDR, XDR systems have, well, our daily headlines are proof enough that these targeted attacks are getting through. And there was a report by NIST who did a guideline for government agencies, and they said that to prevent unknown threats, such as these targeted zero-day attacks, it's necessary to seek an alternative technology which doesn't depend on detection methods and scanning. So we're now getting that as advice from a governmental level that we need to do things which are don't look at the way that things have happened historically.
Right, and in terms of then those attacks, let's say they're successful, because you say that sooner or later they're going to get through our defences. What's the implications of those attacks? How easy is it to recover, and what's available to us to do that? Yeah,
I mean, it's very, very difficult to recover, and we've seen the headlines from some of the famous ones or infamous ones. Redcar and Cleveland seem to be quoted rather a lot, but we know that they're £11 million in and still not fully back to where they were before. So for a council, as an example, it could mean going back to paper and pen. It could be not being able to deliver the services that the community needs. If that were Revs and Bens, that could be terrible. I hear that in Gloucester, because the land registry is down, many people who need a mortgage to move house can't move house because they can't get a search done. So the effects are, in some cases, devastating. In other cases, just problematic for the local communities. And recovery is very, very difficult.
How does that sound to you?
It sounds very familiar, to be quite honest with you, and it's certainly been, I suppose, top of the agenda from my point of view for a good number of years. Like Colin's alluded to, we're learning from what's happened to other local authorities in terms of the attacks that's happened to them, and that important bit, the ability to recover. And the ability to recover is, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and the impact on the delivery of services to the public, to the residents, to local businesses is catastrophic, because effectively everything that they have relied upon is taken away from them while those services are not available. And we know that it does take a considerable amount of time and effort to get, even the basic services back up and running again. So those are the sorts of things that we've been contemplating, and I think many local authorities have been contemplating. And it's about, how do we stop it in the first place? But I think the mindset has switched as well to, okay, then we know it's going to happen at some point in time. We just don't know exactly when, but then how do we recover from it, and how do we recover quickly? And this is about building resilience into all the technologies and all the services that we've got, so that we can actually recover. But the starting point is still back to the basics, where I've been in the IT industry for a good number of years. Protection or prevention is better than cure, so always go with prevention, but also have that mind open to, when it does happen, how do we recover?
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I was at a national briefing recently, and one of the former negotiators for the NCSC was there, and he was saying, and I'm sort of trying to quote exactly him, but it was about paraphrasing probably, but he said something along the lines of, people think that we can come in and recover their data, but we can't. He was very clear that quite often what they're doing in negotiating is delaying the inevitable, and actually the data is gone and you're not going to be able to get it back. And certainly that seems to have been the case in a number of you said Redcar and Cleveland, and certainly Hackney, I think, as well, and a few others where they've had some critical records in social care and they're not able to retrieve them. But I think there was one example, and we can't talk about it in detail because it's kind of not open for discussion, Colin, but there was one example we had in the last year where we were able to use some different technology which actually enabled a ransomware attack to be counteracted after the event, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so yeah, we were able to use tech where what had happened is trying to restore from backup is fine as long as your backup isn't corrupted too. And in many cases they are. And also there are the way that some of these attacks work means they don't just detonate once. They'll hang around, wait a few days, and then another detonation can happen. And unless you've found, and it's very difficult to find out where it is, what it is, and what it's doing. And so preventing re-attack and reinfection is one of the big challenges that one faces when trying to rebuild and recover. And we have examples where, with the use of AppGuard, we were able to give the red team time to actually rebuild, understand what was happening, monitor the attacks that were happening, and as they were re-happening, it would log and show them, but stop them from actually being effective. So it would actually say, yeah, look, there's still something in here and it's trying to do this, but we've stopped it, so you can carry on rebuilding your systems, etc. But there is still some cleanup to do over there, etc. And that's proved, well, it can save an enormous amount of time and effort, which otherwise could be a bit trial and error.
So I mean, how does that? I mean, obviously in detection systems, you will tend to have a dial which you turn up if you're really worried, and then have to run around after lots of flashing lights, or turn down if you want a quiet night. But actually, it's a false, a piece. How does that work if it's not working on detection? What's the basis of it?
Yeah, so AppGuard, it works by stopping the processes that malware needs to be effective. So it doesn't actually need to, it doesn't have a library of lists or anything like that that says, oh, I've seen this before. It simply blocks the process that attackers use to hijack your systems. So the name AppGuard guards you against your own apps. And so most of the attacks I mentioned before, 2 million attacks in 2022 alone on councils, the majority of which were phishing attacks. And once somebody's in, they're coming in via one of our normal applications. And so it's our own applications that are infecting us, if you like, from the attackers. They're using them against us. And so what AppGuard does is stop the process, which is an unnecessary process, which attackers require, malware requires to be effective. It just blocks it. So, for example, it might come in what we would term as user space. You're on your desktop where you're doing a Word document, an Excel document, a PDF, Outlook, whatever you're doing. And in order for that to be effective, it might want to write to registry, for example, change some files, plant something in there, send off a little beacon to the mothership so they can do some things. And AppGuard just stops all of those processes that a Word document or a PDF or whatever doesn't need to do, even when they're fileless. So it doesn't even have to see it. AppGuard doesn't even know what it is. It just knows it's an unnecessary and potentially malicious process. So it stops it. And to have that alternative alongside your strength in depth security approach is, as I said before, something that advice even from government agencies is starting to come through and saying this is actually a better way of doing things.
Right, so it's effectively a really different alternative, so it's a real alternative layer of protection.
Absolutely, and we know there's a malware gap. We know that EDR, XDR, and all the other three-letter acronyms that the marketeers come up with around those, they're good, but they're not good enough. And our headlines prove that. And there's not much point adding another one of the same types of detection methodologies in order to make that step change to get closer. And nothing's 100%, nothing's 100%, but to get closer, you need to that step change comes from a different type of technology, something that doesn't work the same way.
Andy, I mean, you're kind of an early adopter of a new kind of approach. So, I mean, without sort of revealing any sort of confidential details, I mean, you must have had a multi-layer approach already, in terms of what you did. You were following the kind of the NCSC guidance, as I guess Redcar and Cleveland and others were. So this wasn't, you weren't sort of standing there with nothing. You kind of had a multi-layer approach already. Perhaps you tell us where you were prior to adding this additional layer.
Yeah, I think, Colin's sort of alluded to it already. Defense in depth, so a multi-layered approach. obviously starting at the sort of the outer perimeter with some of the freebies that the National Cyber Security Centre actually provide us with, so things like mail check and web check and the protected DNS. All those things have been in place, and we've been working on those for a number of years just to hopefully provide some protection with regards to the internet traffic that's coming into our own organisation. So those things absolutely are a key and are a must. But then we start to work through the different layers with obviously things like your firewalls with your protection intrusion and stuff like that, antivirus and malware scanning at the next level down in terms of across the whole of your network. Then I think, again, many organisations are now adopting things like Office 365 and using the controls and the measures within the Office 365 sort of landscape to, again, to do the malicious and suspicious sort of activity detection. And then, back down to, as we're getting nearer to the clients, sort of the antivirus and the malware scanning that goes on in those. So that's our traditional sort of stack, to be quite honest with you. That defense in depth, it's reliant on traditional methods, which is about the pattern matching and all the things that sort of known threats, if you like, and trying to detect those as they're coming through. So I don't think that's very different to every other local authority, and to be quite honest with you, for a lot of businesses, but based on that defense in depth approach. Where it does lead us very open to the threats is those 0 days, because the 0 days are the things that we don't know about. Well, actually, everything that we've got in place in terms of our protection is about trying to trap things that we do know about. And that's, to me, where my concern, and certainly the concern of my team and my executive team at Safe Staffs, was about how do we protect ourselves against those 0 day attacks. And this is where we certainly found AppGuard and the capabilities that it had available to us. Now, it almost sounds too good to be true, doesn't it, in terms of something that stops a 0 day attack? But it's, as Colin sort of alluded to, it stops unexpected or unwanted behaviour, but allows the expected behaviour to continue. Now, I've looked at and used products in the past that sort of have the white list, blacklist sort of approach, where if it's on the white list, it's allowed. If it's on the blacklist, it's not allowed, but it's looking for patterns again. And basically what I've seen with that is that as the updates come through from the different suppliers, the patterns change, and therefore things that used to work no longer work, and that causes disruption to end users and the services that they're providing. And this is where AppGuard behaves and works very differently.
I'd heard it said somewhere that it takes, something 0 day, something that is entirely new, never been seen before. It takes many, successful attacks before anything is understood about it and rolled out in terms of a patch globally. Is that correct? What sort of scale are we talking about there in terms of the number of, am I going to be in the first 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000? What's the sort of scale of risk, if you like, from those 0 day attacks?
Just to interject there, my understanding is it's about 10,000. But right. I don't know about you, Andy, what your knowledge is on that, but that's what I read.
So you got the risk is quite high from your perspective, Colin, and yourself, Andy. Do you have any kind of perception of that?
We've probably read the same thing, to be quite honest with you. So yes, absolutely. It's those risks, or the hit from 0 day attacks is it's quite phenomenal, to be quite honest with you. So it's something that I think it presents the greatest risk to any organisation at this moment in time.
Yeah. Okay. And that's not necessarily volume, but the risk is high because of the nature of the attack itself.
Yeah.
In terms of then the kind of establishment and the setup of that and the onboarding of it, kind of how did that work for you, and what else in terms of support around that did you seek, and how did that work for you?
Yeah, so back to the point, it was almost like this is too good to be true. So our starting point was we need some evidential proof that it does what it says on the tin. And so we started with a proof of concept. Proof of concept, one, to prove that it does what it says on the tin. Secondly, it doesn't disrupt the things that we've currently got in terms of our services. It doesn't disrupt our current set of technologies that provides the defence in depth, and the support that we require around it. We needed to test that out to make sure it was robust enough to be able to respond to things, whether it was a piece of technology that we've currently got that stopped working as a consequence of putting AppGuard in, or if there was an alert, what happens and how do we respond to that? So a proof of concept tried to tease those particular concerns and thoughts out. What we did, we used our ICT team as a guinea pig, and they have access to and use a number of services. And the idea being that they had that AppGuard installed, monitoring first of all their applications that they're using in a learning mode. By the nature of having it installed, we started to get a feel for how easy is this to implement. What is the support like from the managed service that supports us in terms of was it clear about what we needed to do in terms to get it installed? Were they helpful? Were they responsive? And then once we had it installed, we let it run in learn mode. We started to understand the sort of notifications, not the sort of warnings it was throwing up, and again allowing us to go back to the managed service to say, okay, then we're seeing these sorts of things. Are you seeing them? What's your advice? How do we deal with them? And what I found was through that whole process of iteratively working through, one, the product said what it did what it said on the tin. Secondly, the support that we got from the managed service was excellent. But more importantly, I think it did what it says on the tin, but it didn't impact the day-to-day running of those services that we were taking through the proof of concept. Yes, it was throwing up a few things here and there, but once we'd picked them up, it was clear what we needed to do about them. We worked with the managed service to put rules in place to allow that behavior to continue to be okay. And once we put those things in place, it became very stable at that point in time. We were able to run for a month, clearly doing what it needs to do, closely monitoring, getting the feedback into the managed service and getting the feedback from them as well. But over a period of about a month, we were able to get the assurance for ourselves that the service worked. It didn't impact our other technologies that we were using. It didn't stop our users from doing what they needed to do, and it demonstrated that the managed service was responsive and actually they knew what they were doing and that could deal with the technical issues, but also communicate with us in a language. Sometimes it was technical, it was techie to techie, but at other times it was about communicating with us in sort of what I'll call business language as well. So the proof of concept demonstrated that it is a good product and a good support that we had from it.
One of the interesting things for us in terms of the managed service is, as a sector, we don't have certainly don't have the resources of those nation states, but even at an organisational level, our resources are quite stretched and increasingly so. And the idea that we could, as a group of councils, share a set of expertise across all of our membership was very interesting. The idea that we wouldn't all have to pay for it ourselves, we could share that cost. Tell us a little bit about the team and the kind of the qualifications and experience of the team, because I was quite impressed with that.
The managed service team, or
That's
on
right,
my
yeah.
team, yeah.
The managed service team. Well, likewise your own, actually. But,
yes. So what we found is that they're extremely knowledgeable. I couldn't tell you exactly what qualifications they got, but they knew their stuff really, really well. They're very experienced. We're talking about I would say architect level people that really understand the cyber threats, understand the product, understand how the product and the service that they're offering actually counteracts the threats that are being are coming through. From my own perspective, in terms of my team, we are a very small team. I don't want anybody to think that we've got an army of folks at Staffs being able to support this. We don't, and we knew when we went into this that we were going to be very reliant on the managed service team and their expertise. My team is about 5 people in depth in terms of having responsibility for cyber security and the infrastructure. But what I found was that where our knowledge stopped, the managed service was able to sort of take over, and not only to deliver the service that we're looking for, but also we're able to educate my team and help to bring them up to not to the same level, but to a good level of understanding. And some of our practices that we were doing, not many of them, but some of them, they sort of quality assured them and said, and it was nothing to do with AppGuard. It was just saying, well, actually, rather than doing things like that, it might be better to do things this way. So I would say that there's lots of added value that we got just from having the engagement with the managed service, which was above and beyond what the AppGuard implementation was about.
And from your perspective, how did that team compare to what you see elsewhere? In terms of their skills and the sort of level that they were bringing to the party, how did that compare to others that you've seen in the industry? Can you hear me, Colin?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't realize you were asking me. Yeah, it's so the guys that run the managed service are we did some due diligence across the piece to find those that we thought were excellent, and the company that we actually selected at the end. The 2 owners used to be defenders of UK PLC, so their offices are near GCHQ. They're both ex-forces. The CEO used to run the offensive and defensive cyber for the MOD, and his business partner was one of the GCHQ employees, again put in for offensive and defensive duties. So their experience in cybersecurity, understanding attack vectors, understanding how people, what these state attackers do and what techniques they use, is second to none. The staff they recruit to work for people like Andy are all security cleared. So we've really got the pinnacle of the sorts of people there. AppGuard will work straight out the box, but the fine tuning that one does as an experienced cyber expert is what gives it that extra leap, and that's very important with the attacks that we're facing today. So to have people who are dedicated to cybersecurity to help manage it, and that's their job. When you think about the hundreds of thousands of people trying to attack us, and the limited resources within an IT department, within a council, cybersecurity expertise added to that makes a massive difference to the attack surface that you have.
So how did that work for you? And in terms of going to the council and saying this is what I want to do, and you sort of, I've got multiple layers of defence. I've decided I want another one, and I want to spend some more money. And of course, the budget in the council is flush with cash. How did that work? Was there a level of knowledge and sympathy with members and senior officers, or was it an education piece you had to do? How did that work?
I think a bit of both. So I think, if I again talk about Staffs, there's actually a very good understanding and very good appreciation of cyber security and the risks from cyber attack. It doesn't mean that suddenly they're flush with money and willing to depart with it. But I think it's about building the business case and building the what if. Saying that we've invested in the tools that we've got, and they're good, but there's still a risk around these zero-day attacks, and this is what we tried to bring to life about what is a zero-day attack. And by bringing that to life, not only about what a zero-day attack is, but the implications of it, that says we are doing our best to protect ourselves against this. We know that there's a product out there because we've done a proof of concept that could actually give us greater protection above and beyond. It doesn't replace anything, so this is not a cost saving. This is another cost, but it's a further level of protection above and beyond what we've currently got. And we can never give a cast iron guarantee. And I know, you know, with looking at AppGuard, you would say it's not been broken and stuff like that. But I think it will be foolish to say it's a cast iron guarantee. But there's evidential proof that it protects the council from those zero-day attacks. So looking at it from a business case perspective, what's the risk? If we don't do it, what's the impact and what's the cost of that impact? And therefore, are we willing to spend a bit more around our protection and give us a level of protection that we don't currently have to protect us against that potential impact? And that's the way that we presented it both to the corporate leadership team and to members, and they found that, you know, that was a really good idea for, certainly for South staffs, to adopt AppGuard as part of our defences alongside the existing defences that we've currently got in place.
Yeah, and I mean, it certainly from my experience talking to your team, they certainly seem to be more lean forward in terms of wanting to respond to that. I mean, it's interesting seeing recently the ICOs put out a statement around directors of companies and their liabilities if they don't understand cyber threat and don't create an effective response to it, you know, in terms of their personal liabilities. So it's always interesting to me where you see that, what does that mean in terms of the governance of a council and their responsibilities. And I think, you know, understanding knowledge, education and training, which sounds like it wasn't needed in your case, is an essential starting point for us as a sector, and making sure that our senior manager, our non-IT experts and our non-cyber experts actually have enough knowledge to be an intelligent client in this regard. So I think getting hold of NCSC approved kind of materials to do that is one of our next steps to help our members. So and I think the other thing that, you know, again was interesting is now that you have a kind of desire from the top to extend what you've done out into the community. So the idea that UK PLC at the high level, the large organisations have capabilities and capacities like your own, or possibly even more. But given most of the economy is SME, that's quite exposed. And how can we take your knowledge and learning and actually extend that out across businesses in the community, as well as parish and town councils and third sector and the like. And that's really interesting. I think there's the idea that we as a sector aren't just there for ourselves, but are there for our communities, actually does set us apart in a way from perhaps central government bodies in that regard. So I think there's more to learn there, and I guess we'll find a lot more along the way. I think, yeah, for me, as a non-specialist, actually, I was quite, when I went to the national briefing, quite heartened actually, because it's quite a scary subject. And when I was at South Staffs and the parish councils there, the starting point was, oh my God, you know, this level of threat. But actually starting to understand why people do what they do and how they do what they do actually starts to allow you to break down the problem into bite-sized chunks and actually respond to it. So I thought that was really interesting, and I thought it was really interesting that the capabilities and strength that we have nationally to actually deal with the problem. So in a way, taking that problem, demystifying it, and making the response business as usual is the approach that I think that I saw nationally, and I think it was great to see that locally as well with yourself in South Staffordshire, Andy, and others since. And I think that, you know, as a sector, that's where we need to be, but also we can't rest on our laurels. We need to say, what is the next generation of threat? What will come next? So yes, we've dealt with 0 day now, and we'll have to look for new solutions in that space. But what are the other things that we haven't looked at yet? And one of those, I think, that we've certainly identified is around operational technologies, where we think there's a new, as we go into Internet of Things, new generations of threat that come out in that space. So I think that as a sector, we need to keep looking at the issue, keep breaking down the problem and finding those different solutions to create those additional layers that genuinely add value, rather than getting more of the same and getting diminishing returns as we add those in. So I think it's great to see the progress, but hopefully we'll also see more progress as we go on, and the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, that A, it's easy to consume, and B, that it does, as you say, continue to prove that the concept and deliver the safety that we need for our communities and for our services. So with no further ado, then I'll just say thank you to Colin and thank you to Andy for a great and informative session. And if you would like to connect afterwards, then by all means come through. Annabelle's put something in the chat, and we will pick up anything that you come through to us with and connect them through to Andy and Colin. So thank you, and a good day.